Spectaculum facti sumus Deo angelis et hominibus, which is basically from 1 Corinthians chapter 4, when St. Paul says, we whom God exhibits as a spectacle to angels and men alike. And for those of you who are familiar, it's the passage that goes on into, we are fools for Christ. We are a spectacle before angels and men. Now, the first spectacle in this poem refers to a Father Edmund. Now, Father Edmund is Father Edmund Campion, now considered a saint because he became a martyr. Father Edmund Campion was one of the early Jesuits who came to England to try to help the English Catholics by saying Mass and giving the sacraments secretly to Catholics who were trying to survive as Catholics. And he was captured, and he was tortured, and he was executed dreadfully. And one of the scenes that you'll see, one of the spectacles in this little poem, features Father Edmund's execution, this public execution, which took place actually amid a festival atmosphere. Everybody's having fun while he's being executed. And one of the acts was a juggling act that was going on that apparently got people's attention even more than the execution. And deeper than did ever plummet sound, I'll drown my book. Having drowned my book so conspicuously before God and angels and passers-by who could care less, now it's back to haunt me. The grisly death of Father Edmund, drawn and quartered, they say, was all in a day's tedium compared with the antics of the two Dutchmen that day. One, a midget with stumps for arms, who held the floor juggling teacups, the other a giant. Even less of public note, my book. Become a floating door? One could hope this feast of Thomas, should its hinges swing wide, this door might feature the two Dutchmen and not this poet's famous binges. The door being soggy, and I, now all wet. My story, either sane or a pitiless farce. These fingers, when pressed where nails had been, will unlock my last will to complain. Now, in this poem, we seem to have a book, in other words, the book is the poet's works, being drowned, and then somehow resurrecting as a door. Now, that's kind of an odd event. And I wanted to bring up a poet of the 4th century, 300 years after Christ, in this regard, named Ephraim the Syriac. In fact, some people believe that Ephraim was one of the great Catholic poets, one of the first great Catholic poets. You might say Ephraim, Dante, and now we know Shakespeare. Now, Ephraim believed that everything in creation has signs in it, coded into everything in creation by God the great poem that God is writing, which is Christ. That everything is coded there, signs, icons, in a sense, windows into the eternal mind of God and God's intention for the salvation of mankind. Now, if you look at this poem from the point of view of Ephraim the Syriac, you say, okay, a door. All right. What is let's see, let me ask David. Okay, I got a question for you. What is a door usually made of?
Wood.
Thank you. Wood. Okay. All right. Let's see. Jason. All right. When you think of, as a Christian, you're thinking as a Christian, what do you think of when you hear the word wood?
Church.
Oh, okay. Okay. Teresa? You think the same thing? The cross. The wood of the cross. Right? So that's an example of, you might say, an Ephraim analysis. Okay? All right. What was the door floating in? The poet was all wet. And the door is all wet. And what? Water. Okay. Well, that brings me to the next question. What does water then make you think of as a Christian? Who said baptism? Holy water, okay. And baptism, right? And then finally, the book becomes a door. So what does that, a book becoming a door, the resurrection of Christ, right? So note how being saturated, okay, dare I say even soggy, with Catholicism makes poets of us all. In a sense, what Ephraim is saying and what I think that Shakespeare would agree with. And one of the things to recognize about Shakespeare is, and in the second book written by Joseph Pierce, through Shakespeare's eyes, he writes about the plays and how you can find evidence of his Catholicism in the plays. I'll have these books downstairs where you can look, at the books, and maybe, we don't have any copies, like I said, but you could make a note of how you could get a hold of them. But the evidence that was coded in, because Shakespeare had to code it in, because he had to be careful that nobody would recognize that he was Catholic and get arrested in Elizabethan England. But you have a similar situation in which Shakespeare was, in a sense, forced to be coding in the same way God codes into, according to Ephraim, codes into entire nature the revelation of Christ that's there in all these different signs that are available to us if we would but see. Now, what would a secular critic who doesn't have the eyes of Christ, looking at this poem that I just read, and what would he say about a book becoming a door, and all that. He would probably say something. Well, it's surrealism. If you know the word surrealism, this is a dream-like thing. This is from the subconscious, kind of like Freudian. This is something that's just a hallucination. Right? Pathetically gratuitous, and therefore it's not. They might admire it as surrealism, but then if they would pick up the fact that in the poem this is a Catholic writing it, because after all it talks about, mentions St. Thomas, Father Edmund. Well, then what would they do? They would dismiss it entirely, wouldn't they? They would say, well, this is just some ignorant, superstitious Catholic, Christian. So we're not going to. We're not going to take that seriously, so obviously, we're going to dismiss it. So you see the problem of a Catholic poet that I was describing just in the two different ways that you could analyze it. You could analyze it the way Ephraim does, or you could analyze it as an hallucinatory surrealism. And then if you pick up that it's a Catholic who's saying it in the first place, well, then it's just bad poetry, automatically, right? So, let me continue the story. We left it off with the fingers pressed where nails had been will unlock my last will to complain. In the flooding, the door had washed downstream, cheek to cheek with garbage bags and lawn chairs. I had put on my hip boots and had dragged it across the creek. I dragged it to the closer bank, out of my sight because I could. But that first night, I heard a voice. In all thy works, keep preeminence. Thus spake my embanked wood. That morning, Independence Day, when our homes should be brave and free, the door kept quoting Ecclesiasticus. As long as thou livest and hast breath in thee, let no man change thee. Give not to son or wife, brother or friend control over thee while thou livest, and give not thy estate to another. It troubled my soul. I feared if I turned the door's knob, it might become again my book. Instead, it swung open to another world within a town called Nazareth. I stepped inside to take a look. Now, I promise I'm not going to have any more commentary. I'm just going to read through this, the other 10 poems straight through. But I just want to mention a couple of things, because now together we're about to go into Nazareth. And since not all of us are Catholics, and actually we have a kind of United Nations here, because I know there are people here from the Islamic faith. There are people from the Jewish faith here. So I should explain that Nazareth is the little town where Jesus and his mother Mary and his stepfather, Joseph, lived. When in the hidden years, as they call them, when Jesus lived before he started his ministry. And we know very little about what it was like in his early years as a boy growing up. Now, before we enter Nazareth, I do want to point out that that the name for Jesus that I use is the name that as it was pronounced in the I think it's Aramaic or in the Hebrew, or maybe it would be pronounced, would be in Hebrew. Okay, I'll accept that. And it's pronounced Yeshua, Yehoshua. And Mary's name would be Miriam, and Joseph would be Yosef. Okay. And one more thing I wanted to mention is the inspiration for Nazareth is really the community here at Ivy Hall for me, where I've been privileged to be the servant to the working crew. It seemed like a dream. Laughter and singing as the shops closed. Those who are sowing in tears will sing when they reap. Little mother, what marvels, as her baby dozed. See, I place my word